none of these issues, none of these topics are mutually exclusive from each other. They very much intersect, and it's a very much so that likely an issue of housing inequality is also rooted in health inequalities and also rooted in racial inequalities. So, for example, and I think this stat is dear to many of us who are from San Jose, it was found that 950 students in the East Side Union High School District for the year 2024 were unhoused. That district in itself is quite large, but it's also in what we would, I think, identify as more marginalized neighborhoods of our city. And that's just not okay, right? If we're thinking about, again, education, housing, the possibilities that our society has told us that education can give us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special double release episode for both Only in San Jose and Only in Santa Clara County, your favorite civic ed podcast dedicated to demystifying and democratizing the process of civic participation in local government. My name is Alina Yin, and I will be your host. Welcome, everyone. So, in this episode, we are going to be talking about the newly released annual Silicon Valley Pain Index report produced by San Jose State University, the Human Rights Institute. If you haven't had a chance to read the report, you've come to the perfect place. We are going to be talking about some key highlights and the nuts and bolts of how this report was put together. And a link to the full report is also available in our show notes, as well as contact information if you would like to get in touch with them. Now, the reason I wanted to have this episode on both shows is because of its impacts. While it is a Only in San Jose endeavor stemming from San Jose State University, this report is about the entire Silicon Valley, which stretches across Santa Clara and San Mateo County. Additionally, it's data like the ones found in the Silicon Valley Pain Index that legislatures and policymakers rely on to do their job. It is incredibly important to have reliable data that helps everyone understand the landscape we are operating within. In the most simplest of analogies, you can think of all of this data like we think of our weather reports, not just for the next 7 to 10 days, but what might this winter look like? Is it a La Nina or an El Nino year? It helps us better plan for our future. And unfortunately, there is no sugarcoating the data in this report. Now, I'll just share a few data points that really stuck out to me. We have 79% of Silicon Valley residents felt that buying groceries was harder to afford in the last 12 months. 72% said utilities were harder to afford, and 65% said transportation was harder to afford. 80% of survey respondents who considered increasing wildfires a serious problem. We have 81% the higher cost of living in San Jose compared to the national average. 88% of Silicon Valley residents are concerned about artificial intelligence, deep fakes. 86% were concerned about AI influencing elections. 62% were concerned about the energy use required to power AI. And the last one, 96% of Silicon Valley residents who felt the cost of living was a serious problem in 2024. 78% felt the unequal distribution of wealth was a serious problem. These are not great statistics. We are not in a great place right now. I know this isn't everyone's cultural practice, but I come from a family, from an upbringing of radical acceptance of what is. Some might be familiar with the terms, it is what it is. My parents modeled that for me. It is what it is, and we always move on to what we can do about it and what we can do with what we have until this moment passes. And that's the really, really important part. It's not about right or wrong, because sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have control over those things, but it's really about what can we do with what we have. It's about not being defeated And it may sound like some fortune cookie bullshit, but my parents survived a genocide and forced starvation. So when it comes to moving on and always making with what we have, it was no joke. It takes a certain kind of fortitude to survive one of the most horrible crimes against humanity and somehow be able to make a life afterwards. I know that was not the analogy some of y'all were probably expecting me to make, but that was my life. And unfortunately, it's also real life right now. And what a wonderful life they did create afterwards. And if they can do it, then it's not even about belief, I think. It's a fact that I can, you can, we can create a better life for all of us. And that's the other part of this report. What will we do with this information remains to be seen. Okay, now let's get to our interview with a few members representing the Silicon Valley Pain Index team. In this interview, we have Dr. Michael Dow, director of the San Jose State Human Rights Institute, Dr. Anji Buckner-Capone, principal investigator of the Silicon Valley Pain Index, and two student researchers, Ruth Melton and Brianna Costa. So you can find their full bios along with the full Silicon Valley Pain Index report in our show notes. And now to the interview. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this special episode on the Silicon Valley Pain Index. This is an annual report that is conducted and created by the San Jose State Human Rights Institute. And now we are going to meet the team behind the report.
Yeah, thank you, Elena, for having us on your podcast. Really honored to be here. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Michael Dow. I am currently an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology, but for this particular podcast, my main role is the director of the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about the project. My name is Anji Buckner, and I am a faculty member in the Department of Public Health at San Jose State. This is my third year being a part of the Silicon Valley Pain Index.
Yeah, hello, I'm Brianna, and I'm a Master of Public Health student at San Jose State University, and I'm also proud to serve as one of the research assistants for the 2025 Silicon Valley Pain Index.
And lastly, hi everyone, my name is Ruth. I am a fourth year at San Jose State undergraduate student studying communication, and this was my first year being a student assistant for the Silicon Valley Pain Index, and I'm really excited to be here.
And thank you all for joining us for this episode. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So to start off, for people who are not familiar with the Human Rights Institute, Dr. Dow, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute, but we call it HRI for short, specializes in research, journalism, policy, and programming design that's really related to social justice and human rights topics broadly. We act and we hope we act as a service to the broader community. Like we're not just a research academic institute on campus. We really want to be a resource for our community members and those who we work with to try to really enact and address some of the systemic issues that our region faces.
One quick follow-up question. So the Human Rights Institute is within academia, but they do work with the public. So are there other projects that they have done in the past or are doing concurrent with this report?
The one other one that I can say like proudly that we've done is the People's Budget of San Jose, which was from 2020, 2021, and 2022. It is the other forward-facing public research project that we've done that is on par to the Silicon Valley Pain Index. Um, Aside from that, individual faculty members that are associated with the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute have various projects that they research on and their own specific lines of research, whether it be like Dr. Armeline, who was the former director of like human rights theory praxis, um, also others who are doing like abortion rights, healthcare, health equity. So the institute in itself, we have projects that we focus on as a team, and then we have our own individual projects that branch out as well.
Thank you for that. I think that is a facet of public universities that not many people know about, which is all of the incredible projects that are done in service of community, like the People's Budget. So now I would love to get into the historical context of the pain index. And Dr. B, you were the principal investigator for this. So can you walk us through that and what it looks like?
Thank you. So the pain index was really inspired by a faculty member who teaches law in New Orleans when he put together a pain index 10 years following the Hurricane Katrina. And the idea behind it was just really to highlight that progress has been made, but there are a lot of disparities and a lot of inequities that continued to impact that area and that region. So a few years ago, a colleague of ours at San Jose State, Dr. Scott Myers-Lipton, put together the first Silicon Valley Pain Index in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests following the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so that first report was similarly to the report from Katrina. It was designed to highlight and showcase where there are continued disparities and inequalities in our social lives and in our political and economical lives here in Silicon Valley.
Wow, that is some incredible history that I was not aware of. I'm glad that we have that down. And now, can you walk us through what collecting and looking at this data looks like?
This is a really different kind of a research project and something quite unique, I think, in the way that students and faculty work together to pull together the document. So some of the things that make it really unique, it evolves and it's different every year. So every year we assemble a group of people who find us because they're interested, or we try to find people who would make a positive contributor to the project. And what I mean by a positive contributor to the project, we're looking for a range of perspectives and a range of interests and expertise so that the report doesn't weigh any direction heavily than others. And so we want to highlight, like I said, I'm a professor of public health. So we certainly want to highlight public health, and that is my interest. But we also want to highlight areas of social and economic inequalities. And so we need people who are studying and researching and understanding social and economical inequalities. We want to highlight environmental inequalities and things that are happening that impact people in all of the holistic ways that we know inequality is experienced by people in our community. And so we try to assemble a group of people who really represent a diverse set of perspectives and interests. But even though we may have a diverse set of areas of expertise and interest, people pursue what they want to do in this project kind of on their own. So people might come in and say, I'm really interested in learning more about or pursuing this thing this year. And so we will allow and encourage folks who are working on this project to come in and do things with it that they're really interested in pursuing and learning. So that's impactful for faculty, but I think it's almost more impactful for students to be given an opportunity to say, what are you interested in? Now go learn about it, and let's find data and information that can help you better understand this situation or experience. So I think a second thing that makes this project really unique and different in comparison to some of the other research projects I've worked on is that we don't collect any primary data in the report and report writing itself. We rely 100% on secondary data. We rely on data that have already been collected by other entities in our community. So it can be other researchers, it can be programs, it can be nonprofits, it can be the government, any body or groups of bodies that are collecting data that tries to depict or understand the lived experiences of people in our community, we want to find and use in this report if it's going to help us better understand the range of experiences that people have. So the first part of like how this team kind of works together is getting more familiar and getting an understanding of where we can find data and how to work with those data sources that we find. And so there are a lot of data sources that are not easily accessible or not easy to understand. And so that's the first step is how do we pull data or extract data from these sources and from these different places that have data, so that when we get closer to the report, we know how to use the data sources that we're currently working with and then can just focus on finding the data point that is the most current and the most relevant.
Really quickly, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly when you are speaking about primary and secondary data. So, primary data is if you were conducting the research yourself, which you said you are not. And then secondary data is you are actually collecting data points from other maybe research and sources and collating it, correct?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you. Now, one of the really interesting things that you had mentioned was that the report is also kind of driven by students and their interests. And so each year the report might be different because you are obviously getting different students. I also saw that most of this data is from Santa Clara County. I did see San Mateo County, and I know Silicon Valley is huge. So how many places and counties are you looking at?
We define Silicon Valley as San Mateo and Santa Clara County. If we were to weigh it, it does lean heavier in Santa Clara County data. But we do look at Santa Clara and San Mateo County, and have had people reaching out with this new report saying you really should be including Fremont and in East Bay more because of so much tech industry influence now moving into East Bay. So I think I was saying that ideally we do want the project to be driven by students and student interests, but it really depends on the students who show up and how driven they are to pursue those interests. So students will typically work with us for a semester or for an academic year. And some students have more self-initiative to take on projects in different ways than others. And that's, I think, something that's really exceptional about this project is that it really can kind of structure supports in ways that are helpful for students in any stage of the continuum of where they are in their own kind of self-development or professional development along pursuing the interests that they have. But sometimes we'll also have fewer students working on the project. And so in years where there have been fewer students engaged in the project, it does become more faculty driven. So it really just depends on the year and who we can put together on the team. This year we had an exceptionally large team of both students and faculty, which was fantastic. So we had 10 students working on this project in undergraduate and graduate programs. They did work for a full year, so most of them started on with us in the fall of last year, doing more of the what am I interested in, what kinds of data sources are out there, and how do I better understand what data sources I might use to answer the questions that I have about the curiosities that I'm exploring. And then in the second half of the academic year, so in the spring, is when people are really more focused on finding data points that we want to include in the project. And then the report is published in the summer, which is outside of the regular academic calendar and academic year. And so then it becomes what students and what faculty still want to continue to be involved through the summer planning and the actual formal production of the report and the release of the report. And then the follow-up conversations that are so much fun to have with the community once the report is released, because the community has questions, they have concerns, and they have an interest in how this report can be useful and hopefully, from our perspective, meaningful and productive to our community as a tool to drive some action and change. And so that becomes work that is really voluntary and based on what people want to do and want to continue to be a part of.
So I'm curious to know, in this year's report, did you run into any problems gathering data with everything that's happening on a federal level? Did you run into any things that were impacted by the local data that you were seeking for this report?
I thought we would have more troubles than we did, but I suspect that we may predict that that could be more of a future problem than a current problem because most of our data had already been collected or were available, or to your point, are county and county driven. And we haven't yet seen the impacts of how federal funding is going to then trickle down into counties that may impact what counties are able to do next year. We didn't get to see that impact this year, but that is definitely something that we are trying to keep our eye on and plan for future reports and future years. It's not a concern that we're taking lightly or negatively.
The news always feels so immediate and urgent. And so it's really good to know that the report this year, wasn't impacted. However, future years are quite uncertain. And it's not just obviously here in San Jose or Santa Clara County, but really across the nation. And it really just speaks to the importance of this kind of work. So now let's get into some of the key highlights that the report found this year. Dr. Dow?
Yeah, certainly. I do want to reiterate, like, the data that's here is tremendous a job done by the students, particularly Brianna and Ruth, who are here with us right now, and Angie, Dr. Capone helping it out. Generally, like, the data speaks so loudly to the inequities that really permeate our region, our communities here in Silicon Valley. Um, if I were to really hone in on things that I find or what have been sort of communicated to me is the housing inequality that we're facing here in Silicon Valley. Um, it's we have to imagine this that none of these topics are mutually exclusive from each other. They very much intersect, and it's a very much so that likely an issue of housing inequality is also rooted in health inequalities and also rooted in racial inequalities. So, for example, and I think this stat is dear to many of us who are from San Jose, it was found that 950 students in the East Side Union High School District for the year 2024 were unhoused. That district in itself is quite large, but it's also in what we would, I think, identify as more marginalized neighborhoods of our city. And that's just not okay, right? If we're thinking about, again, education, housing, the possibilities that our society has told us that education can give us, and we know now that that's really being attacked, and it's really being taken away, and some others. And that would also, kind of guide me to talk about the school closures in the Allen Rock School District and then the Franklin McKinley School District, right, which I think Ruth did a tremendous job there, right? And why that's important is because that's all connected, right? Like the Allen Rock School District feeds into the East Side Union High School District. Same thing with the Franklin McKinley. So what do we're seeing this housing, or sorry, this education inequality from grade school to high school now. It's all across the board. And then I think it's really, I don't want to say the word easy, but that's the best word I can get off the top of my head right now, to see how that issue can grow into, um, housing and then poverty and getting jobs, getting status, right? And so many of the things that our community feels in Silicon Valley. Um, and then generally, if you just go through the report, and the way it's written, the smallest number to the largest number, there are things that stand out. We were emailing back and forth about sort of the percentages of newly unhoused as compared to people who are unhoused, who aren't unhoused, and how that number changes. And the sort of final point there is, like, these numbers aren't changing in a rate or at a pace in which we feel comfortable with as a society, I think. In fact, that they become stagnant, or they increase, right? Like, they're not helping, they're not being addressed. Yeah. So
Absolutely. And I know a few schools that are actually closing that I've attended here in San Jose. So my elementary school and middle school are part of these closures. And I also want to just kind of to add on to what you said, Dr. Dow, is that taking a moment to really applaud the team here, you included, because this work is incredibly important. Because one of the facets of local government when it comes to academic research, like the Silicon Valley Pain Index, is that it enables elected officials to act on the issues by creating laws and policies and bills and programs to address the problems. And good policy really depends on this kind of work, this kind of research. Like one of the previous episodes that we've done was about the Vietnamese American Service Center, and that actually stemmed from the Vietnamese American Health Assessment, first of its kind, that was done in the county. And now there is this physical building, this place offering culturally relevant services where there was none before. And it did take some time. I believe there was like 8 years of community engagement and then there's design and build. So it does take time for things to manifest physically. And the Silicon Valley Pain Index is only a few years old, but in those few years, there have been some legislative actions that I saw in the report. And while those may not have taken physical form yet, I believe they are on their way. It just takes time to emerge. And speaking of emerging trends, one of the things I did notice in the report were a few key highlights on people's concern with climate change, climate disaster, and even water and air pollution from AI and data centers. Was this new to this year? I'm curious to know what the trend that you're seeing from past to present from the Silicon Valley Pain Index this year.
Yes, I'll start it off and I'll pass it on to the others that are here. Yeah, so the Pain Index report changes every year on priorities and areas that are hot at the time. And right now, climate change, environmental sustainability is very pressing, right? And it's a everybody issue. It really is. I wish we would imagine that and embrace that much more, but we don't, right? Because those are just taking that. If we consider everything a resource, the resources are being funneled into certain areas by certain people, by the certain percentage of people who have their authority and the power. And that is creating, to use the terms that we have here, pain across all of the other communities that don't have those resources. So yeah, I think with AI in the water, that's going to be something that's really big. It's going to be something really big in San Jose, right? Because our mayor has made some promises, has made some things that relate to AI that could be that could be damaging. And that's not me to be so critical, but it is me to at least name what's happening. And I think that's sort of the point of this report, is to show everyone the numbers, which are representative of people's lived reality to the public and to elected officials and such. And yes, generally every year there's like a specific area that comes more prominent.
I was just going to add that this is also an area and a good example where we're really at the whim of the data that are available for us in the community, because since we're not collecting our own primary data for this report and we're collating and bringing together data from many, many, many different sources, we are relying on those data sources being there. And if there are no incentives for industry to publicly share what they're doing and how they're doing it, and if the transparency with how organizations or industries share their data is jeopardized by policy or interest, we may not be able to capture the full picture of what is going on. And with AI and with the amount of physical space and water resources that are necessary, and the volume of the increased development for these data centers that we're seeing in Santa Clara specifically right now, like that has direct and immediate impacts on neighborhoods that if we don't have the data, we won't be able to continue to put those things in the report. And that's not going to be a good thing for the community, because it will just silence the experiences that people have, and it won't give us something that we are kind of a tool that we can use to go back and advocate to our elected officials what our experiences are and what is happening. And we're seeing, as we may predict, we are seeing data centers and we are seeing the resource consumption impacting low-income communities more than affluent communities. And so we're already not addressing issues that are affecting the same populations over and over again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, especially with some of the lesser known impacts of data centers like air quality. It's not like the pollution is just going to stay within the city county lines. Air pollution will impact the entire region, which again only makes your work even more important. Okay, now I want to dig into some of these research areas. So, Ruth, I understand that you were focused on education quality and inequities. So, from your perspective, what stood out to you? And also, why did you choose to focus on this area?
Yeah, well, before I dive into the data and what I researched, I did want to shout out the structure of the pain index and how it allowed students who are new to this research to really explore their interests, and also explore what what needs I see in my community. I think it's a very empowering structure. I think it's important to have that kind of, I guess you would say, in terms of allowing students to do their own research, kind of like a grassroots approach. People who are involved in their communities get to then research their communities and then try to do something about it by presenting this data. So I'm really grateful for that structure, and I think it's very important. I personally, I have been in public school system my entire life, and it's kind of, I know some people might be inspired by difficult situations that they'd had, but I had an amazing elementary school experience. It was a Title I bilingual, very community-centered elementary school, primarily Hispanic. And I just, going forward, I've seen friends, family who have complete opposite experiences, and I want people to have that experience where they have support in their community, they have resources, and it just doesn't happen. So often it just doesn't happen. And as the housing crisis gets worse, education gets worse, public education gets worse, and underfunded schools become more underfunded. So that was a big trend. Something I'd like to highlight is how housing and public education go hand in hand, um, in California. I'm sure in other states as well, but in California, that has kind of always been the case. There's been different formulas that have been used to allocate funding over the years. The one that we currently operate under, it's called the LCFF, the Local Control Funding Formula. It was an attempt at equity, at providing schools money based on their lack of or abundance of local property taxes. The attempt was, if you're a community or district with a bunch of local property taxes, you won't get that much state funding. And if you don't have that many local property taxes, you'll get a lot more. But that formula can no longer keep up with the wealth gap that just keeps getting bigger. The amount of property taxes in those wealthy districts, the state funding can no longer catch the poor districts. They can't catch them up. So that's one of the big reasons, if you really want to break it down. It's kind of a domino effect. Starts somewhere, and now we're seeing families moving out. Why are they moving out? It starts somewhere. That's just been really sad to see, because it's a process that starts, it doesn't come from nowhere. It starts years in advance. And moving forward, now we're seeing 14 schools shutting down. We have, I believe it's 3 different school districts in East San Jose. These are primarily Hispanic and Asian families that are being affected. It's like Dr. Dow said, it's an everyone issue. Even if it's not your community, you are part of San Jose, you are part of the Silicon Valley, and nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything affects everyone. So that was kind of my big takeaway. Like you said, the point is to see legislation, be enacted to make a difference. Our next elections are in, about a year and a half or so. So hopefully by then there's some support taking place for these communities and schools.
Yes, I am so glad you mentioned that, especially on the school board level as well as the city and county level. Also, thank you for explaining the funding mechanism. I know I wasn't fully aware of the details around state funding allocation versus property tax. I feel like most people are not well aware of this, so thank you. Now, I'm curious to know, as you were researching all of this, how much guidance did you have? Was there a blueprint? Did you have to do it from scratch? And how hard was it to find the data? Were these databases pretty accessible? Or did you kind of have to sleuth it out on your own? So, yeah, can you kind of walk us through what it was like?
Yeah, before I dive into that, I'm glad you point that out because I think there's so much information now that a really easy way to stay uninformed is the feeling of being overwhelmed. Like there's so much information, I can't possibly get to the bottom of this. And that might make people feel as if there's nothing they can do and they can't make a difference in their community because they don't know what's going on. But this process really helped me realize that it's just a matter of putting in the time and the work and reaching out for help, which I did with uh, Dr. Dow and Dr. B. But yeah, it did take hours of work. And it did take guidance from Dr. B on, where did this database come from? Who should I reach out to confirm that this is correct? Can I ask them questions about how they did their research? Because, it's not primary research, it's secondary. We want to make sure that these facts are correct. But all this information it's on the internet. We should make the most of what we do have access to at the moment. And yeah, it took a lot of time. It was mostly on my own. When I had questions, I would reach out. But yeah, I got to learn how databases look like, government databases, independent databases. I learned what nonprofits are conducting research, what reports to look at, how to look through agenda notes of council meetings and board meetings. All of this it just, you know, this is what's happening day to day in our city. And just because I'm not there experiencing it doesn't mean that I can't know about it, and potentially be involved. So yeah, informing yourself is a very powerful. It's tedious and you have to be dedicated to it, but I'm really glad I got to learn more about that process.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And that is really on point to why we also produce these podcasts from a civic education perspective. I'm also, looking through these council agenda meeting minutes, the attachments, and also what you're describing is what any resident would be doing if they are serving on a board or commission. And everything that you're doing is also how policy and laws are actually made. First you have to find what's there, the data, what you're working with, how we can make the most of what we have, how we might reassemble it in a different way to serve more people, or where things are missing that we need and we definitely don't have. And this, like you said, Ruth, is accessible to anybody. So it's really amazing that the Silicon Valley Pain Index is offering that to students as well. Inviting students into the process is really building a culture of not only community service, but the skills for effective civic participation. So really kudos to you both for doing this and to the faculty members for supporting this project. Okay, so the next area I wanted to dive into is the public health inequities. And Brianna, I'm told you are one of the lead researchers on this part. Can you share your perspective with us and what you found in your research?
Yeah, so I just think the project in general deeply resonated with my commitment to social justice and health equity. So I was kind of drawn to this work because of its focus on exposing the systemic disparities in the region In my research, I focused a lot on, like you said, public health, homelessness, housing, and income inequalities. And I did come across like a lot of troubling trends, but the main thing that like really stuck out to me was how deeply like interconnected public health is with all of these things. So income, race, housing. And it's just important to note that like these issues don't exist in isolation and that they do compound one another and create lasting health inequities for our communities. For example, like the report found that Santa Clara County has seen a 58.5% increase in homelessness, and then San Jose alone experienced a 56% rise during the same time period. And then in just 2 years, between 2023 and 2025, the unhoused population increased by another 8.2%. I just feel like it's that they're not just economic issues, they're public health crises, and unstable housing is linked to chronic stress, poor mental health, limited access to consistent health care, which are all increase the risk for long-term health problems. And then at the same time, during my research, we also see like communities of color, especially Black and Latino residents in the area, are disproportionately affected. For example, our research found that like Black mothers are more likely to experience maternal health complications, infant mortality, and also environmental disparities when compared to other racial and ethnic groups in the region. And these are outcomes that stem not just from individual factors, but from systemic racism within healthcare, environmental injustice, chronic economic strain. And all of this is also made worse by the region's affordability crisis. Our report does highlight that San Jose is the fourth most unaffordable city in the world, and the cost of living is 81% higher than the national average. These conditions create a cycle where economic pressure leads to housing instability, which in turn then worsens health outcomes, especially for people of color. And so, like, for me, that's why I believe public health work needs to go beyond healthcare access, to include things like housing policy, wage equity, anti-racist system change. Overall, my work on the pain index really reinforced like how public health is shaped by so much more than individual choices, and we shouldn't be separating it from housing, race, or economic policy, because the disparities we see are systemic and they demand systemic solutions. The pain index really brings like it makes it visible the patterns in the community that often go ignored, and kind of like helps to lay the foundation to advocate for real change that we want to see in the community.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head about the need for systemic change and how public health is the intersection of all of these things. And one of the things that actually really stuck out to me were the statistics on asthma. I know it was mentioned a couple times in the reports about hospital visits. There was stats that, went cross-generationally as well as racially, with like Black and Latino populations being more impacted. So how do you see all of these stats pieced together, and what other underlying themes, if any, could we deduce from these statistics?
I think for communities of color, environmental conditions disproportionately affect communities of color because of things such as income and housing. Historically, and even now, communities of color are being pushed to parts of town that are, yeah, they're environmentally burdened. So areas that have higher rates of pollution, maybe they live next to a highway or factories, because of income inequalities, and it just creates these persistent health inequalities for communities of color who are being pushed out of the region.
Ruth, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, it was really brief, and it's more of a personal anecdote, but just in relation to asthma and low-income communities, I think housing can play a big part of it because depending on the quality of the housing. I had a friend who had severe asthma because of the AC unit in her apartment. Um, she lived in a low-income neighborhood. Apartments of not that great structure or quality, and she had a lot of built up asthma and lung issues because of the AC unit built into her home. So, it's a very specific example. It's not related to any research, but I did wanna just mention it and that, it's part of the system. Housing is affecting everything.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because even if it is anecdotal, it's still real lived experience. And that is something that people can still talk about when we talk about affordable housing and the materials and quality of it. Like, how are we guaranteeing that the quality of these homes are not making people sick? And they should have that guarantee as a human right. We all deserve to live in environments that don't make us sick. Okay, so now as we wrap up, I'd love to talk about what people can do with this report. I know you had a press conference. What else are you doing to get this work out there? And this might be a question for you, Dr. Dow.
Yeah, so yeah, we had the press conference and we released it to publicly. It's on our website. You can also email me at michael.dowd@sjsu.edu if you need a PDF of it. Um, what's been great is that there has been in the past elected officials who have used data from the PIN index to support some of their policies or what they're putting up, particularly at the state level. So like Senator Cortese, Assembly Member Lee, and some of their bills. I also find it very inspirational when community members are asking me for the report or asking Dr. Buckner-Capone for the report, just to highlight specific statistics that would inform the work that their community-based organization or their nonprofit or just their activism work more generally. I think this report can be, um, pushed way further with the resources that maybe some other organizations or other people may have, or the influence that they may have publicly. But yes, we also have been and can go do presentations in the community. I've done some at not at community-based organizations, but really, we want this to be such a public resource that it would help some organization um, either pursue their agenda or support their agenda. Mhm.
And you've also mentioned, I think it's mentioned in the report, that the Silicon Valley Pain Index has been used for some legislative initiatives that are either in discussion or have been passed, right?
Yeah, it's correct. So it's written in the report, but SB 33 from Dave Bortese, SB 68 from has 685 from him, and then AB 3229 for someone like Member Lee. Those are just the 30 that are in the report that can be referenced. Um, I know, in passing that a lot of our local elected officials use it, particularly people at the county. So the county board of supervisors are very keen on it, and some members of the city council. I think though that if I can push this further, as well as my colleagues and others out there, like this is real data, right? Like this is not something we made up. This is not something that we just put together to showcase the problems that we're facing as a community. These are used or can be used to really support people who are doing the groundwork, and I admire those who are out there going to council meetings, going to protests and are just the ones out there who are really pushing social justice work.
Absolutely. It takes many, many hands to create systemic change. Okay, so now that we are nearing the end, I did want to ask Ruth and Brianna if you could give a call to action or encouragement for your fellow classmates to get involved. I am proud to say we do have a Gen Z listenership. Why should they get involved with the Silicon Valley Pain Index, and why is student representation so important in this type of work?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage students to get involved in the pain index for personal development, academic development reasons, but also just for the sake of contributing to your community. It's a really win-win situation when you get involved in this kind of project. Also, because you're entering a workspace, a research space, where there's no hierarchy. You're being supported by the professors, and in general, I would just say it's a great opportunity. You get paid. um, it's a great opportunity to develop your research skills. Working with data, I think in the Silicon Valley, more and more, jobs are working with data, looking at data. It's also, you can personalize it based on what you're interested in. If you're interested in like housing and the economy, you can look into that. If you're interested in other areas like me in education. But in general, just talking to Gen Z, I think the like overload of information, like I said, can desensitize you or blind you to the reality of the specifics of what's happening in your community. And this project helped a Gen Z student like myself to realize what those specifics are, and why they matter. So I really will always hold this project up to a high standard, and I hope a lot of students are also inspired to join it as well.
Yeah, so just adding on to what Ruth said, I think for me, I really do recommend like getting involved in work like this. Personally, like for me, I was able to gain like a better understanding of how to work with like dashboards, how to disaggregate data based on what's available, or reading news sources and seeing where it links back to and going to the actual resource to find information. And just data wise, it was a really good for me. And you can use it academically, professionally, like the skills you learn. But I think the main thing that I got out of this and that I would recommend getting involved is yeah, just being involved in the work that impacts the community. So the communities that we're living in, our families, our friends, not I mean, we go to school in San Jose, which is literally like right in Silicon Valley. So maybe people don't have great idea of what's going on in the communities around them. So doing this type of work just kind of exposes you to just some of the issues that we can advocate for in the community and just playing a role in that to make a difference.
Thank you. And thank you both for your contributions to this report. I really enjoyed reading it, and despite it being a little stressful, however, I did appreciate the section that talks about some of the legislative actions that have happened as a result of this work. And I will say, having done similar research looking into other states, I'm really grateful at the amount of data that we do have access to here in San Jose, Santa Clara County, and really California as a whole. And I've tried looking at other states where this type of data is incredibly difficult to find, if at all. But we have so much to work with, and it really is a matter of being able to dedicate the time and resources to look through and research all of the sources. So, as we wrap up, Dr. Dow, Dr. B, anything else you would like to add?
I do. I really want to advocate that people who are reading the Peen Index have comments about it. Please let us know how it can be improved, what areas that could be looked upon even further for the coming years. What can be changes that are more pressing. I also want to say, in my responsibility as the director of the HRI, that this doesn't happen without support, like from the university, from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, in which we got a grant, in which Dr. Capone got time off, and then for the students, some of the students to get paid. But what that also means is that as a research institute at a public university, we are severely underfunded to support this work. And we're looking for grants, we're looking for opportunities that will help support it. So if anyone has any of those, please reach out to me. Or if anyone can support the Pain Index in that way, please reach out to me. Yeah, and lastly, I think my main role, and I talk to Dr. Buckner-Capone about this all the time. Like my main role is as an educator is to foster development skills for students, such as Brianna and Ruth, who I am astounded by. I tell them all the time how enamored, how high their quality this year. And that's what we want out of this project too, right? Like we want to ensure that students who are participating in this are getting what they want out of it, while also understanding that they are actually playing a huge role in creating change. They really are. And I know it doesn't feel like it because things are going on in the world and it's not like so immediate and it's not like tangible, like can't feel it, but these differences are coming, and then you guys are a part of it. So thank you.
I just want to add that you mentioned that we do have a couple points in the report of how it's being used. We know that the report is being used more than what we've highlighted in the report, and so we do want to know, in addition to the community input in terms of the types of content areas or data points that we should explore more, or ideas on where to find those data points to better understand a particular experience in our community. We want to know that, and we want that feedback. We definitely want to know if we've made a mistake, but we also want to know how people are using the report. We want to know individually how people are using it, and we want to know organizationally and in an advocacy or arena, or from our local officials and offices of our elected officials, how the report is being used or could be used. And so we're gonna put an ad on our website with the report, a link to feedback where people can tell us more about how it's being used, so that we can try to track that a little bit better. Wouldn't it be great one day to have the report flipped and have way more pages of all of the positive impacts and the changes that we're seeing and characterizing in our community, than having all of these data points that are highlighting inequalities? And so that's maybe a long-term dream of mine. I don't know how long.
Yeah. The Silicon Valley Joy Index.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And it's like the complement. It's the complement to it. Because let's be honest, we live in an amazing area. There's a lot to be really proud of, and there's a lot to be really happy about, but not at the expense of so much inequality that the people are really trying to live through. So it would be great if we knew how this is being used, and how we could better prepare people for using the report in ways that can drive an increase in knowledge and understanding about the diverse experiences that people are having, so that we can all, collectively fight for the changes that we want to see in the communities that we're living and working in. So
Definitely. I will be providing those links for feedback and email. Everything's going to be in our show notes so people can access that. So now wrapping up, thank you so much to each of you for taking the time to share your wisdom, your knowledge, and also like your personal perspective on the project. I'm really excited for folks to listen to this and also to better understand like what it is, how they can use it. And I look forward to future reports, and then maybe one day the Silicon Valley Joy Index.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, folks, that wraps up this episode. Now, I want to close it off by reiterating what Dr. Buckner-Capone said. There is so much to love about where we live. And like Ruth mentioned, all of this data can be overwhelming. But in taking the time to process, to understand what we have, what we need, and remember, the report is also very clearly stating what people also want. We are concerned with climate, with the irresponsible and reckless development of AI. Like, do we really need it in our emails, in Google search, ripping off artists and making Studio Ghibli postcards that we've already probably forgotten, buried in our photo album somewhere, never to be looked at again? People are also mentioning, and this was kind of a surprise to me that it was a mention, which is 78%. That's like a supermajority in terms of voting. 78% of Silicon Valley residents felt that unequal distribution of wealth was a serious problem. And there is absolutely 100% something that we can do about it. It won't happen overnight, just like the overturning of Roe v. Wade did not happen overnight. But with consistent, organized civic participation, trust me, we can fucking do this. And with that, come join us, come volunteer with us, and let's get to work. And if you've enjoyed this episode, give us a like, give us a comment, a follow, donate. And until next time, stay strong, drink water, and I hope you do something good for yourself this week.